Okay, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Samantha Marshall, Associate Director of Alumni Engagement at the University of Toledo Alumni Association. In honor of Social Work Month, the Alumni Association has partnered with the University of Toledo College of Health and Human Services Social Work Program to provide our alumni, friends, students, faculty an opportunity to hear from one of our faculty members who is an expert in her field. Before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to share a few housekeeping notes. As a friendly reminder, all participants are on mute. You are able to use the chat feature or the Q&A feature during the presentation to ask questions. We will take a short break during the presentation to address any questions that you have. For those of you interested in receiving continuing education credit for this content, please remain on the WebEx platform after the presentation has concluded. We will share instructions with you on how to complete the post-event evaluation. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Janet Hoy-Gerlach, Associate Professor in the University of Toledo Social Work Program. I knew I was going to mess that word up once, at least, the program. She will present today CE, Understanding Legal and Ethical Issues in Mandated Animal Abuse Reporting in Ohio. She has more than 20 years of experience in community mental health service delivery. She's an advocate of recognizing and supporting the bonds between people and animals as client strengths within social work practice, as well as across settings and populations. Her current research is focused on the health benefits of the animal-human bond, especially as related to emotional support animals. She is trained and presented nationally and internationally on ESAs, and has served as an expert witness on ESAs for the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Department. As an advisor to Ohio animal advocates, she has provided expert testimony. Animal, I already said that. And she has helped develop the Hope and Recovery Pet Program, my apologies, which places shelter animals as ESAs through a unique collaboration between ProMedica, the Toledo Humane Society, and the University of Toledo, one of only such programs in the nation. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Janet Hoy-Gerlach.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and thanks to all of you for joining with us today. So I wanted to start with just a brief story of how I got to be here right now talking to you and about this particular topic, which really comes out of my broader interest on the relevance of human-animal interaction for social work practice. And really, that all goes back quite a few years ago now to when I was working as a clinician doing risk assessments for folks either at risk of suicide or seriously hurting somebody else, or both. And particularly talking with folks who were thinking about suicide seriously was what got me pointed in this direction. And so, as you might expect, when I would be talking to folks doing a risk assessment, one question I always asked people was, what has stopped you up until now from acting on your suicidal, thoughts, plan, etc. And I got the answers that I had, been taught to expect in my social work education and later in supervision and CEU training. Answers like, it's against my religion or my spiritual beliefs, I'll go to hell, or I would never do that to my kids. I couldn't, leave them like that, or I couldn't hurt my family or my friends, or even, I'm afraid to die. But often enough that it gave me pause was a response that I got from folks who said they didn't want to leave their pets. And two things about that struck me. The first thing was, as a quote unquote animal person, I've always, had connections with animals that have been important to me throughout my life. So like just on that personal level, I totally got it. It made sense to me. Um, the other thing that struck me was nowhere in my social work education or training had people's relationships with animals even been mentioned or addressed, let alone considered as a protective factor that could in fact be one of the reasons a person's not acting on their suicidality. So that really got me thinking. And fast forward many years later, a lot of my work is on the benefits of human animal interaction. But with every yin there's a yang, vice versa. And there is indeed another side to the interconnection between human and animal relationships, and that pertains to violence. And unfortunately, I had my share of experiences with that as well. In my current role as human services advisor for Ohio Animal Advocates, they're a statewide nonprofit that does a lot of advocacy and policy work. And most recently they've been doing some work focusing on the intersection between animal well-being and people well-being. And as part of the testimony that I provided for them on House Bill 33, which is the bill we're going to talk about today, I shared with them a particularly difficult assessment I did. At another point in my career, I was doing a lot of diagnostic assessments for folks coming out of prison that were mandated to mental health care and had a history of violent offense and conviction. And so as part of the assessment, I would get detailed histories about violence, past and most recent, that kind of thing. And there was one particular situation where the man shared with me that he had very recently put a kitten in a jar and put the lid on, and had taken some pleasure in watching her slowly suffocate, and crying till she was out of breath. And I think he described it in fairly specific detail to me as well, which was pretty traumatic for me at that point in time. However, I was immediately concerned. There were other animals in the household. There were children in the household. He wouldn't say whether or not he had did that in front of the kids. And so based on that, and in a situation like that, that would be an instance where at that point, with Ohio laws, a report could be made with, concern around the children's well-being. However, if it was just what had happened to the kitten and there were not the interests of other people, directly, immediately at play, that would have been an instance where it would have been questionable for, on a licensure level, if I ethically should be reporting or not, in terms of was I violating confidentiality. Because at that point there was no legal, I did not have civil or criminal immunity. I felt ethically compelled, because of the possible risks for other people in the household. But it would have been a big old question mark. And I wish I could say that's the only time I've had to deal with something like that in my own career. Unfortunately, it's not. And as my work with human animal interaction has gotten more known, I've been contacted on a pretty regular basis with, not that exact situation, but pretty horrific situations where people who want to do the right thing, want to honor their ethical obligations, uphold all they're supposed to be doing with their license, but feel like they're not doing that if they don't report. And I'm not gonna, gratuitously describe to you those kinds of things that people consult with me on regularly. However, it's been an ongoing issue, and at a state by state level, places have begun, or states have begun to provide protections for clinicians, social workers, and others to be able to report violence toward animals within the broader context of seeing it as harmful to people and to our broader society. So what we're going to look at today, it's not the lightest topic, but the good news is we now have a tool which we're going to look at more, called cross-reporting, which is essentially a policy tool that helps to strengthen anti-violence efforts in communities by connecting the dots and helping to build collaboration between the different anti-violence entities, if you will. So we're gonna take a look at what's called the link, which is basically the link between violence toward animals and other forms of interpersonal violence. And that's really the foundation for this legislation, why it's passed, and why as social workers it's something that really can be a meaningful and valuable tool in helping to keep our clients and our communities safe. The second piece we're going to look at is more specifically around what the responsibilities are for social workers. So coming out of this training, I guess my goal for myself is that, I share with you information so that you feel equipped leaving here, that you can describe the responsibilities, that you understand the process, and that you're comfortable moving forward. And we'll also be, looking at our code of ethics and just taking a look at how that fits this mandate that we have. I always think of our code of ethics as our North Star. That's our guiding point. And so I think it's important to situate this within our code. So those are the general directions we're going to take today. I welcome questions. I want to make sure that you get what you need from this today, so that you feel comfortable and equipped moving forward. So I'll be stopping periodically throughout the talk, but please feel free to put in chat, and Samantha's going to be monitoring that and helping those to my attention periodically. Okay, so we're gonna back up a little bit here, because sometimes the question is raised to me, and very sincerely, we're social workers, so we work with people. So why should we be routinely considering pets in work with client? Animal abuse aside, just in general, and that the reason for that is very much connected to why we've been asked to pay attention to animal abuse. So that's why I want to spend some time here. For starters, this isn't going to be, working with people who have animals isn't the sort of minority of folks we're going to be working with. In fact, the American Pet Products Manufacturer Association, okay, this is like the industry group for, uh, Petco and PetSmart and all these big transnational pet corporations. They have an industry interest group, and it's very well funded. So they do the biggest demographic survey in the country, research on people with pets. So their most recent demographic study found that about 68% of households reported having at least one pet in the United States, and over 50% indicated they considered the animal to be family. Another chunk of people, talked about their animal being a companion. Very small percentage identified the animal as property. So this is indicative that most of the folks we're going to be working with are likely to have animals as part of their ecosystems, if you will. Another reason to keep animals in mind is again part of a client's sort of social context or ecosystem is interaction with animals, and having a bond with animals can be associated with both physical and mental health benefits. And that's a presentation for another time. But some really cool and powerful things are being discovered with research around that area. And so this is one of those, sort of going back to the risk assessment kind of perspective, like it's a underutilized natural support or strength in our clients' lives. And this is what we're going to be looking at today. The flip side of that is there's also a link between violence toward animals and violence toward people. And it's a multifaceted link. And it affects people and families in multiple ways. And what it really is suggestive of, if you look at the literature around this pretty broadly, is that if we want to be effectively addressing family violence, we need to be looking at the animal as part of the family system. Violence toward animals can be both, a issue in its own right, and also sort of an indicator, like an early warning red flag to other kinds of violence toward humans. So there's that. There's also folks attached to the animals who are witnessing the violence and the whole sort of sequelae of trauma around that. So kind of multifaceted issues with this. And again, to really understand the link, we need to consider how animals can be a part of family systems. And really we can look at that through our biopsychosocial perspective, which is very much a foundational social work lens that we bring forward. So if we think of family, and starting where our client is at, of course, how the client defines their family, it's not necessary at all to be an animal person to be able to support somebody who has the animal that's important to them, any more than you would need to be a sports fanatic if you had a client with a really deep passion for sports that was a real strength for them. It's very much about, the way we foreground what's important to our clients and honor and respect that. So not about being an animal person, although it helps, but really, about being a competent social worker. So if we think about the biopsychosocial perspective, there's of course the three dimensions then, and I guess the first piece to consider is biologically that our reaction to animals that we have a quote unquote bond with actually has biologic underpinnings. There's been a fair amount of research coming out about oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone that originally was discovered during breastfeeding studies and was released in both, the infants and the breastfeeding moms. It's associated with powerful, emotion, positive emotion, attachment, physical effects, sort of, warm fuzzy feelings, if you will, relaxation, physically slowed heart rate, slowed respiration rate, slowed blood pressure. So all sorts of calming, good feeling things. It was then moved from breastfeeding to what's called kangaroo care, which is basically skin to skin contact, the infants on, the parents, chest or bare skin, and oxytocin and all the positive benefits that provides being released and helping to promote bonding between the pair that way. More research uncovered that oxytocin wasn't just a parent-child thing, but actually was released between humans that necessarily weren't even related, not sexual. That's a different set of chemicals. But friends, family members, people that you have a caring for. And finally, it was found to be released between people and animals when there was an ongoing relationship, typically. However, also even just single visits with therapy animals, after about 10 minutes, oxytocin can be released. So we have a pretty significant hardwired response to animals if we have a general, liking or affiliation for them. If, we're afraid or allergic or have a trauma or something, of course, then that's not going to hold up. So we have this biological component, the bonding hormone, and actually even most recent studies even show that prolonged gazing, eye contact, not just with our people, but our pets, our animals that we're bonded to, release oxytocin in both them and us. So the studies are showing that the animals' oxytocin levels are going up, as are the people's. And then, of course, we have the psychological, which, we're probably all familiar to varying degrees with attachment theory. Feelings of attachment, animals as secure bases. There's been research around that. So having a psychological kind of an attachment to an animal. There's been research that show actually they for people that have attachment styles other than secure, animals can offer a bit of a safer, if you will, attachment figure that can be helpful in its own right, but some folks look at that as, possibly a transition to healthier attachment with humans. So different work being done with that. And then finally, the social role of animals, right? We know in family systems theory, if you think about when we talk about family systems, we talk about roles. What are the roles in the family? And we talk about function, like what are the functions of these different roles in the family members. And a lot of the research indicates that animals in households, pets or companion animals, offer, roles, meaningful roles for the person, and also perform functions. So just a couple examples, role examples. People talk about their animals as my baby, my best friend. You've probably heard dog mom, cat dad, lots of sort of roles. Also kind of giving people a role for themselves around caregiving, feeling needed. And then the function, keeping me company is a big social function. There's research that shows pets drawn into kids' support networks, and even in the innermost circles, when they had them put circles, the smallest circle being their innermost connects, and then sort of further out were connections that, were less significant or meaningful. And notably, a number of kids had the pets in the innermost circle. So that's just some, we could do a whole training on any one of these, but really, looking at a biopsychosocial perspective, how animals can be considered part of a family system member for our clients. And these are just some illustrations. If we think about what family means, we have rites of passage, we have celebrations. So here we have animals who were members of different wedding parties here. And of course, photographed, and even I see some outfits, a bow tie. Holiday cards, again, included right with family members. General family pictures. And even with our elected folks, there's been recognition of the role of pets within, our presidential families, vice president. This is Socks, President Clinton's cat, President Bush's dog. President Obama had a couple dogs. President Biden just actually had an incident. His shepherds left the White House. I guess they got a bit reactive to one of the White House security officials, so they are living in a different residence. And then this is former Vice President Pence, and he actually has 2 kitties and a bunny rabbit. So even in the context of our national leadership, we consider pets as part of family. Some other evidence of this sort of shift in viewpoint from animals as property to at least, pets as being family members. This was a study. This is actually the service dog for George H.W. Bush laying in front of his casket. Didn't want to leave it after I assume they asked him to lay there for a photo op, but then he stayed put. Obituaries, people including pets of people who had died with descriptors like faithful, ever faithful, loving, loyal, beloved, devoted. The term pet was actually rarely used. Typically, the animal was listed by name along with the species like dog or cat, and then other family members. Another indicator of sort of this shift we're having, families split up. And when that happens, most law around, animals and divorce treat animals as property. However, it's not like most of our animals can be sold, and the the proceeds divided and you know, people in the relationship being happy with that. In fact, most folks would probably not be very okay with that. And as a response, actually, Alaska was the first state in the United States to, I'm sorry, that should be pass pet custody law, basically taking a look at where the pet should go based on factors other than property, and actually even including pet well-being. Illinois and California were the second and third. Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia have legislation that's pending, and there are some estimates that within the next decade or so, most states are going to have some sort of accommodation here for these kinds of situations, because otherwise it becomes kind of contested and more difficult and sort of a case-by-case basis. And you know, a lot of court, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, clogging up and delays as it is. So to have, you know, clear policy that can help expedite is I believe the direction that things are headed there. And then finally, if we look at families in crisis, there's actually a couple of federal acts that have passed. Interestingly, it's for me, both of these have bipartisan support, which and actually that's the case for House Bill 33 as well. This seems to be one of the rare issues where people can still work across the aisle politically and find some common ground. So the Pets Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act was passed in 2006 after Hurricane Katrina. And this passed really, the whole issue crystallized this picture above here. This is a little dog named Snowball, and this officer here was you know, doing his job, what he'd been charged to do. Families were getting on buses. Animals were not permitted on the buses or in the shelters. And a little boy was holding this dog, and he took the dog from the boy. The boy didn't want to put the dog down to get on the bus, although, you know, his parents were telling him he had to, but he didn't want to. And when Snowball was taken from him, he started sobbing so hard he vomited. And this was caught by the media, and essentially went what we would call today viral. Like it got a lot of attention, you know, both across, you know, political spectrum, and folks really came together to make sure that this wasn't going to happen again. Now this was just like you know, kind of the incident that brought everything forward, but what was also happening is people were refusing to evacuate because they were not wanting to leave their pets behind, and then we're ending up in very dangerous situations because of the flooding, and they were at risk. The rescue workers coming in to try to help them were at risk. When they were brought out, you know, refusing to leave their animals, they would bring them. There was nothing necessarily set up, so it was a big old mess, dangerous and tragic. And this little Snowball dog, nobody knows exactly what happened, but the Pets Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act essentially requires areas, if they want FEMA funds, they have to have a plan for pet evacuation along with people, so that this people staying behind, refusing to evacuate because they can't take their pets, a child being traumatized on top of, being in the middle of a horrible disaster, losing home, being displaced, and then having, one of perhaps his major supports literally yanked from his arms. All of those things influenced this, but we now have it, national legislation that requires that pets be included in evacuation planning for people so that doesn't happen again. More recently, Pet and Women's Safety Act, PAWS, passed in 2018, and this was a response to data research coming out showing that people were either delaying leaving because they were afraid of leaving, their pets to harm in domestic violence or intimate partner violence situations, or sometimes not leaving at all because they were afraid of leaving their animals behind and didn't have alternatives to keep their animals safe. Safe from what? Well, typically if the person being battered has a strong attachment to an animal, that animal is likewise a target. And so the PAWS Act was passed essentially to provide funding for housing for folks coming out of domestic violence or intimate partner violence situations who had pets, and also providing some additional protections by including pet service animals and emotional support animals in federal law related to stalking, protection orders, and restitution. So at the federal level, even we're seeing this recognition of pets as part of family systems. So very much like the PAWS Act here that I was just sharing with you, underscores, the upshot of all of this is animal abuse can be best understood if we can see it for what it is, that it's occurring in a family context, and there is, of course, research that's showing that it's related to other forms of family violence. And this little infographic here and all of these overlaps are typically referred to as the link. And there's a littler one, but the link, again, is sort of a catchphrase underscoring that family violence, the different types, don't occur in isolation to each other, but rather there's connections and overlap between animal abuse and the other forms of family violence here. And there is now what's called the National Link Coalition. It's been around for a bit. It started in 2008, and purpose, not surprisingly, is twofold: to improve the safety of people and animals, essentially through trying to integrate and coordinate anti-violence efforts, across both human and animal efforts, basically to strengthen the safety net across the board, both through practices and policies. And so if you're interested and want more information, this is a great resource. Phil Arco is the coordinator. He is very responsive. If you email him, I've worked with him a bit, but before I ever, knew him, I would email him occasionally with questions, and just, very responsive, passionate person. But they have trainings, resources, up-to-date information on policies and laws by state. So if you need information for a state other than Ohio, this is where I would point you. This is the sort of resource in terms of resources and information for the link. So I don't have a poll feature here, but I just want you to think to yourselves, true or false, the first child abuse conviction in the United States occurred through the efforts of a humane society. And this is the picture of the child who was egregiously abused. And if you answered true, you are correct. At the time of her abuse, there were not child protection organizations. And so the first child abuse case in this country was actually brought forward by the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelties to Animals in 1874. And this in turn led to the founding of the New York Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. See the parallel there, even in the name. This was the world's first child protection organization. And locally, actually, here in Northwest Ohio, we very much paralleled this. We were about 10 years behind, but actually way ahead of the curve. The Toledo Humane Society is the third oldest humane society in the country. And when it was founded, I put the quote in here for you to see, but you can see to provide for the care and support of children, aged parents, overworked, underfed, and abused horses, and protection of all dumb animals. So this was essentially functioning as a social service organization. And I actually was able to look at some of the investigation logs from the late 1800s. One of the former executive directors did a whole historical research project, and the log entries of investigations for older adults and kids were interspersed with the animal investigations, and sometimes in the same households. It was quite interesting. And so in some ways, we're kind of going full circle because, of course, we know the organization split out and specialized, and eventually completely, started functioning in silos to varying extent. But as research began to bear out the connects between the different form of violence, the pendulum started swinging back, and the idea being we need to leverage our efforts and work together and connect the dots. And if we're in the same household, let's coordinate. So all of these reasons, there's been increasing legislation across the country focused on trying to strengthen efforts to address, abuse of humans, abuse of animals, particularly child abuse. So this is a few key points here to further explain the link from Dr. Barbara Boat. She does a lot of work for the National Center for Prosecution of Child Abuse, and this was a particularly groundbreaking piece she wrote about ESAs, exposure to animal cruelty and toxic stress. And some of the key points that she put out, and really her audience was prosecutors of child abuse nationally. But she highlighted, household pets are typically in the same environment as kids. And research is increasingly associated with other forms of family violence. And in fact, prevalence of animal abuse is higher in families where there's child abuse and intimate partner violence. Pets are frequently the targets. And some studies point to up to 76% of animal abuse occurs in front of kids. And from what more biologic focused research is finding around witnessing intimate partner violence, other forms of violence and abuse, and what that can do to child brain development. So actual, physical changes in terms of how the child's brain develops, not advantageous ways, but more in ways that are associated with um, different kinds of functional impairment to varying degrees. And so with this kind of information about changes in child brain development, consideration of being exposed to violence toward a family pet, that the research is still not conclusive in terms of is that how additive is that, but the concern is that all of the indicators based on what we know already suggest that this is gonna be another component of harm to the child's brain development. So she describes it as toxic stress, and it looks at the literature, the research around that, and brain development. There's also a move to include witnessing animal cruelty or violence explicitly, to encompass that under ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And ACEs, briefly, this is a group of different kinds of stressors that kids experience in early childhood. Abuse, neglect, a parent or caregiver having an addiction, divorce, mental illness, different kinds of stressors in early childhood that have been found to strongly predict health and mental health outcomes as adults. So, the concern here being even, longer term kinds of effects. Research that has come out, a whole actually sort of series. This was one of the groundbreaking studies by a colleague of mine, Dr. Shelby McDonald, who's at Virginia Commonwealth University in their Human Animal Bond Institute. She looked at the effects of witnessing animal abuse amongst kids who were living in households where they had already been witnessing, or were concurrently witnessing intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And just to take a step back here, emotional child abuse, pulled a national definition from childwelfare.gov, so federal endorsed definition here by state. Of course, this could look a bit different, but it's emotional or psychological abuse. What is it? It's a pattern of behavior that impairs a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth. May include criticism, threats, rejection, withholding love, support, guidance. Numerous behaviors are listed as emotionally abusive, and these two I pulled out. There are others, but terrorizing, where the adult creates a climate of fear, bullies, frightens, or corrupting. The adult encourages the child to engage in destructive and antisocial behavior, reinforces deviance, and impairs the child's ability to behave in socially appropriate ways. So these are our two components of what could be defined as emotional abuse. And witnessing animal abuse is increasingly recognized as emotional abuse of children. Different percentages depending on the studies you look at, but at least 25%. And a lot of the studies look at maternal victimization, and that is a lot of what I have here. That is not to say that domestic violence doesn't occur with same-sex couples or toward males. So I want to be real clear about that. The research has just primarily focused toward maternal in terms of the link. So also see their pet threatened or abused. They actually recognize a number of the kids in these studies that the motivation was to control their parent. And one or the other of these were often happening. One, the child was being terrorized if they were strongly bonded to the animal, viewed the animal as a support. Watching their animal be threatened, harmed, killed, just, a whole sort of trauma experience here. Alternately, kids were sometimes enlisted and became complicit in the abuse of the animals, which we could look at as the corrupting behavior, engaging the child and normalizing deviance and antisocial behavior, both of which very harmful to the child. So Shelby McDonald, in her study, she did research with a statewide sample in the Western United States. Again, this was focused on moms. So, limitation in terms of not being representative of other experiences of domestic violence, ethnically diverse, mix of folks who identified as Hispanic or Latino, Black, and white or Caucasian. A total of 291 kids between the ages of 7 and 12, all reported having a family pet at home. And they're, on average, their moms had been experiencing DV for about 9 years. So each mom and child pair completed questionnaires, and this questionnaire, the child's exposure to animal cruelty, was assessed, essentially asking if they had or had their pet threatened, and if their pet had actually ever been hurt or killed. So they looked at these two sort of data points, threatened or hurt or killed, and compared that to 6 domains of adjustment with the kids. Social problems, this was like peers and behaviorally at school, attention problems, straightforward internalizing. This is like internal mental health. So anxiety, depression, kinds of feeling states, externalizing. So these are behaviors that they're putting out, which essentially having trouble regulating and being appropriate. So disruptive or aggressive, ability to empathize, and related to that, demonstrating callous or sort of lack of emotional traits. So looked at these components, looked at these domains and used statistics to see what the relationship was between those. And findings, basically they grouped the kids into 3 categories. The kids that had minimal issues in those categories were identified as resilient, 66% of the sample. Struggling, so having difficulty in some of those to a moderate amount, 28%. Severe maladjustment, these were kids who had significant struggles across multiple domains, 17. And there was statistical controls around the witnessing of the intimate partner violence, so that the exposure to animal cruelty could be looked at specifically. So basically, kids that were exposed to animal cruelty were just over 3 times more likely to be in the struggling group and almost 6 times more likely to be in the severe maladjustment compared to the group of resilient kids. And again, the kids in the severe maladjustment had clinically significant social, attention, depression, anxiety, and acting out kinds of behavior. So this was a landmark study in terms of connecting witnessing animal abuse with emotional maladjustment, right? So if we kind of jump back here. Impairs a child's emotional development, terrorizing, corrupting. I mean, these aren't specific to animal cruelty. These are general animal or child abuse definitions and resources, and it's major check, check, and check. So, and Shelby actually has gotten funding to expand her research by the National Institute of Child. It's the NIH Child Development Research group that I'm blanking on the acronym for, but she is off and running, so I'm very excited to see where she goes next. So again, implications of these findings. First, some of the first research to connect violence toward animals witnessing as predictive of emotional development impairment. Practice implication, identifying this factor, kids you've witnessed can help us to identify kids at the greatest risk and do some early intervention. And certainly this whole population of kids, if they're witnessing, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, they're already at risk. So it's kind of risk within risk here. And if we think about those 4 circles with the link, and we've been talking about child abuse, which in the study I just looked at with you is in the context of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. But it's certainly not just the children that are affected. And, as evidenced by the PETS Act that was passed at the federal level, I think this piece of the link is getting some attention at the policy and planning level. There's still a long way to go, but essentially, significant number of women, 49 to 71% reported multiple studies that their pets had been threatened, harmed, or killed. Majority of domestic violence shelters in a national study reported people or women, reporting pet abuse. This is actually an example of a pet-friendly domestic violence shelter where crates are provided, and then there's space, of course, some of the spaces where there aren't animals to, be sure to accommodate people who aren't comfortable or allergies, asthma, that kind of thing. But also having pet-friendly spaces. And essentially, pets threatened, injured, or killed to coerce or control, punish, terrorize, access to the resources to help care for the pet were or can be withheld. Access to pet food, veterinary care for the pet, injuring the pet and then withholding veterinary care, or even access to the actual pet of the pet. Especially if the person being abused is strongly attached to the animal, that can be another way to coerce, punish, or terrorize to withhold access to the animal. Safe havens for pets, again, that Pets Act provides funding, and those can go a couple ways. There's actual co-shelters like this, or partnerships with like humane societies where the animal, can be placed in a foster home, and when the person enters the shelter, are a couple of the ways. And in Lucas County, we actually have funds. I believe it was a bequest. A donor who passed away gave funds, so people going into domestic violence shelter, there's actually a funding for boarding for them, for their animals. So number of different ways this can be put together, and rough estimate is maybe 1,200 of these kinds of sheltering situations. And if we think about domestic violence and the power and control wheel that I'm sure all of you have seen, and we think about somebody being bonded with an animal who's being abused, we could walk through each of these, and the animal could absolutely be used against the person in a lot of these ways, intimidating the person by glaring at the animal, or actually it's right here, abusing pets, emotionally terrorizing the person by killing the animal in front of them, withholding resources, vet and food kinds of resources that the animal needs, threatening the animal. So if the animal is important to the person being harmed, then the animal becomes part of the power and control abuse dynamic here a lot of the time. And this is actually from the National Sheriff's Association, which I appreciated. It's very much aligned with, a lot of how we would want and hope law enforcement would work with folks experiencing domestic violence. So this was from a brief they put out for sheriffs, but they underscored 65% of women going in continue to worry if they've left their pet. Up to 40% of people experiencing report being unable to leave because they're afraid for their pets. Not real high numbers here in terms of provisions for pets. And this data point here, they found a substantial number of people were living in their cars until an opening was available at a pet-friendly shelter or safe house. So people unwilling to surrender their pet to a shelter, and so staying in their cars. And just a few tips, since we're on the topic of people are, and it's also from the sheriff's site, if people are not able to take their pets with them when leaving, contact the local animal shelter, contact your veterinarian or trusted, friends or family, not couple friends necessarily, to try to see what options there might be to get your animal to safety. Have a paper trail when you're vaccinating and licensing pets. Try to put the registration in the victim or survivor's name, so that there's proof of ownership if it's contested. I would strongly urge, if the animal is at the going to be sheltered through the local animal shelter, I would encourage a undisclosed foster home. The reason being is, there was actually an episode, some years ago where the perpetrator showed up at the animal shelter, trying to claim the animal, and knew the animal was there, apparently had coerced that out of the person who was being battered, and had gotten back in contact with him. So important to keep the location by it. And if the person has left and wants to go back and get the animal, police, animal control, don't go by themselves. We're very much along the guidelines we would use, person, going back to their home for other reasons. And this is just a little more to revisit the PAWS Pet and Women's Safety Act of 2018. This was a public service announcement here. And some good news, just last month, there was additional funds, $500,000 increase in the funding that was already allocated, to do additional funds for domestic violence shelters. So the U.S. Department of Justice administers the grant programs. There's going to be grant guidelines coming out in upcoming months for folks to apply. So, and again, in interstate stalking too. So by putting these animals in federal law pertaining to protection orders, this is actually working across states, which was one of the major gaps, even when states had protection orders for including pets, so that the pet couldn't be harmed to get at the person. When state lines were crossed, that would sometimes fall apart. So this was a very helpful tool. So we've hit the two parts of the link. We've hit child abuse and we've hit domestic violence. So the next couple parts of the link, we're going to look at elder abuse and then animal abuse. But I want to pause here for just a minute. Are there any questions, Samantha?
Yes, there is one question that came in, and this is going to go back to the beginning introduction portion of the presentation. We had a question about how were you able to stay assertive while having the gentleman tell you about the abuse of the kitten?
Wow, that's a great question. It was hard. I think, this was, I guess, a place where my social work training and education was really helpful. That self-awareness, like I could feel all these reactions bubbling up in me. I still remember it very vividly because I was so upset. but I guess, I mean, I just sort of like acknowledged it and put it aside and tried to focus on, the task at hand, getting the information. Like I already knew in my head, like I have to talk to my supervisor. Like, I mean, I wanted to just, stop the interview and go talk to my supervisor, but, I sort of kept myself in check and reminded myself, nobody's going to be harmed right now. He's here. He's talking to me. He's not going anywhere. He wants to finish the assessment because, it's court ordered. And so some self-talk and I guess in my head already having decided that I needed, supervision support immediately after the interview to process through, and then just staying very task focused, um focusing on getting the information. But it was not easy. um
Thank
is there
you.
what's that?
Um, so we had another question that came in, and this is someone who is asking if we are able to provide information on how to access the Lucas County Fund for folks entering DV shelters who also have pets.
My understanding is you call the hotline, and when the person is entering the shelter, um, then the arrangements can be made for the pet. And I don't even know where that the pets go for this. But that is my understanding, but I can double check on that. And um, I will contact the um, Domestic Violence Coalition chair and just make sure that that's how that works, and I can send you back an email, Sam, that you could forward to everybody. But that's my understanding of it's right when the person's calling the hotline to
Okay,
get
that'd
shelter.
be great. I know that you had shared with me via email, Janet, some documents and resources. I think there were some PDFs with different information about what you were covering today. Would you mind briefly just, were those documents shareable? Is that the intent was to share those after the program?
Yes, yeah, I actually will bring those up. But those are some resources. So some of them pertain to just helping people with animals. If it's, they don't have money for food, or they're struggling to afford vet care, or they need, a temporary place for their animal. There's a tip sheet around, animal abuse in House Bill 33. There's actually just a brief analysis of the bill written in very user-friendly language if anybody just wants to take a look at actual, the actual policy, kind of a summary of it. So I will walk us through that definitely, and then we can email those to all of the participants as well.
Perfect.
Oh, and a link to looking up where to report, because that varies by county. So I want people to be able to easily, figure that out.
Great. I do have, it looks like one additional question that has come in. And this question is, if a person is leaving a IPV DV situation, can they drop their animal at a local humane society for safekeeping?
That would be on a case-by-case basis. They would need to contact the Humane Society and talk with them. Some humane societies will, temporarily foster. It depends, on the humane society, and typically, humane societies have plenty of animals that are already, who are already homeless. So that, if they're able to keep, person and animal together, they're often interested in working with folks. And these are places where we could use some of our meso skills as social workers to build partnerships ahead of time, so we're not, kind of case by case reinventing the wheel each time. But there's different funds available now, and the big federal grant I mentioned is one, but a lot of the big pet food corporations, and then there's an organization called Red Rover. And I have a list that has some grant resources with Red Rover's information, that has funds even for humane societies if they want to do temporary sheltering. So it's there's a lot of collaboration happening. Like people are really starting to connect the dots. Like from at the shelters end, it's animal homelessness prevention. Like the animal has the person that's committed to them. Let's keep them together, by temporarily picking the animal. But it's really it depends on the organization.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
It looks like those are the questions that have come in. So I will encourage participants to continue to use the Q&A or the chat box as we move through the presentation. But with that, I will kick it back over to you, Janet. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just wanted to check in. I'm going to talk a bit about this next piece of the link, and then I'm aware of time here, and I want to make sure we take our break. So get back to the graphic here. Okay. Okay, I'm just revisiting here. So we've talked about child maltreatment and kind of this overlap with animal abuse, and we've just talked about domestic violence and all of these overlaps here, if you will. What we're going to look at next is elder abuse, and then move into the actual animal abuse piece. I guess I should check back into, and just to revisit, so we're taking time here, but this is really the foundation for why we have this policy. So being able to understand the link and give at least two examples. I'm sure you'll be able to come up with more, but essentially having a good understanding of why we have this mandate is what we're looking at here. Okay. Okay. So some of this is going to be sounding, very familiar. Emotional abuse. Pets can be used as leverage to coerce and manipulate older adults. Not unlike with the intimate partner violence. Something that can be different is when a person is experiencing changes in their functioning, to where they're maybe struggling to care for themselves, then they may also have difficulty caring for their pet. So with older adults, sometimes the perpetrator is inadvertently the elder, but not deliberately, either because of lack of ability or lack of resource. And the inability, it could be physical, it could be financial, it could be emotional or cognitive. Hoarding is, of course, something that can happen, across the adult lifespan, but can, happen with older adults with particular detrimental effect to an older adult if they're having, functional self-care difficulty. And then end up with a group of animals that they're, maybe well intended to rescue and care for, but are unable to. So what we're going to look at here, this is actually a research brief from the Journal of Elder Abuse and Neglect. So again, the coercion is emotional abuse. Witnessing abuse of their pets is emotional abuse. So this is more of like the terrorizing and coercion. The corruption part, not so much happening here with the older adults. And this was probably one of, if not the biggest national surveys of adult protective service practices, looking at animal and abuse and neglect. And they had folks respond from all, or 41 of 50 states. And of the respondents, 51% did not ask any questions about pets. And only one state at the time this was done inquired about pet-related concerns beyond asking whether or not the person had one. 4 of the states that responded stated animal welfare was important in working with older adults, but did not assess for it. In all of the states that responded, they indicated APS workers could add notes of concerns and that there was additional information sections. So it wasn't specifically asked for, but at the discretion of the workers, it could be included. And this was an earlier survey, 2003. High co-occurrence of adult self-neglect with pet neglect. So again, what this is suggesting here is very strongly that what's needed are supports and resources. And I can speak at least for our Humane Society here, Toledo Humane Society. They very much work from a standpoint of providing supports and help to the extent possible when it's a situation like this. So if supports and education or resources are what's needed to get the pet properly cared for and in the home, kept in the home. If the home would otherwise be a good attentive home, that's how they approach in investigating their cruelty reports. And I definitely, I can't speak for all shelters. I am doing a training, kind of the flip side of House Bill 33, talking with the animal cruelty investigators and dog wardens about changes pertaining to them and child abuse and the human side of it, kind of the reverse of what we're looking at today, next month. And so I think I'll be able to get a better sense, but it definitely, people aren't in a hurry to pull pets from a otherwise good home. So, maybe that making the, a call with your client even to see what kinds of resources could be provided would be an option. And 75% pet welfare issues complicated process of providing services. So essentially, client refusing relocation if pets can't go with them, or hospitalization if there's nobody to care for the pet. So again, that much more of a commitment than the animal is like a property item, like a very deep commitment to the animal. So the recommendations here, essentially screen for animal welfare concerns when there's elder abuse cases. So being proactive, not expecting the older adult to necessarily, be forthcoming or even, identify or recognize such as abuse or something that we could be of help or support in. The recommendation was, general questions and any, specific items or follow-up. There's a whole screening protocol at the National Adult Protective Services and follow-up protocol questions if there is animal abuse. And again, connections with animal welfare organizations to link clients with supports. Animal shelters nationally, there is what's called Human Animal Support Services. And this isn't new. This actually came out during the HIV and AIDS epidemic in California, where people were becoming really ill, but their pets were tremendous comfort to them. And it was also when, the stigma was just terrible. So a nonprofit was founded to, all kinds of just basic help, getting people pet food, walking the dog, scooping the cat boxes, helping get the animals to appointments, helping people keep their animals as long as possible. And that's since evolved to a national movement. And they're actually even hiring social workers in these human animal support service roles in shelters. And again, the big pet corporations, pet store corporations are interested in funding these for obvious reasons. They, that's their profit source. So people having healthy, stable relationships with pets, that's their bread and butter. So increasingly, these sort of meso level networking to have supports for our clients can be, viable options. And these are 3 recommended questions in sort of the adult protective service literature, essentially asking, do they have pets, and asking a little about them. Do they have any worries or stress? They feel the animals are helpful, if so, how? So basically getting at, the stressors, and if so, what? If their strengths, if so, how? Leverage the strengths, help, bring resources to the table to reduce the stress. And I mentioned the Human Animal Support Services. There are also within human services, increasing consideration of animals for older adults. So one example is, Meals on Wheels has done some meetings nationally with some animal protection groups, and increasingly they're incorporating pet food drops as part of their services. And a couple reasons for that. One being that people were sharing their meals with their pets, and so not getting the proper total meals themselves. And again, another reason being, people having distress around not having the proper food, and overall just even a behavior activation, people being more motivated to engage in self-care if they were doing it for their animal as well as themselves, because feeling that their animal depended on them. So a range of resources there. Okay, we are let me see, I guess let me check in. Any other questions? I know I had just paused, so anything
I have
else
one
come up?
question that just came
Sure.
in. So this attendee says, I work in a healthcare setting, and oftentimes people might need to leave their pets for a hospital stay and do not want to leave their pets. Are there any local resources that could help with pet care?
Is, okay, let me see if I can One moment. Sorry, this is taking just a moment. I want to pull up a web page and my computer is being very slow. But it's moving, so we'll take it. Okay, are you seeing Community Pet Care Clinic?
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, so this is a clinic that is in South Toledo, and they are a full service, not for-profit veterinary clinic. But there's a couple unique things about them. One is that they have a affordable care model, and so they work with people who can't afford care. They actually have a veterinary social work intern who I supervise named Jessica. And she, along with a social work intern at the Humane Society, created this. And this is in the resources, but I thought I would point it out now. So these are some temporary foster care resources. This would be the domestic violence crisis line. So this would be in the event of domestic violence. The Toledo Humane Society on a case-by-case basis could be a possibility. The Compassionate Village is contact by email, and they do have a temporary foster program that they have information about on their website. So these all would be possibilities that I'm aware of. And since we already have it up, free dog training and also low cost options. And I believe, and here's a whole list of pet food banks, low cost grooming, low cost spay neuter, help with transportation, low cost vaccines, and some mobile services. So this is a list specific to Toledo. And then Ohio Animal Advocates is kind of my go-to statewide. So I'm pretty familiar with what's happening here. And I'm human service advisor for this organization. And as I said, they were instrumental in working with NASW Ohio and the state Adult Protective Service Organization and the state child public service organization, domestic violence coalitions to get House Bill 33 passed. And they also have some wonderful resources. Why am I not finding? Statewide resources, clearly labeled. It's almost like an animal's first call for help. So if you're not in Toledo, you can put in, your zip code, what you're looking for, and you can always email and ask. Or if you have additions, you can also contact them. So sort of a statewide animals first call for help in Toledo if you have need. Other questions?
That is it for questions so far. Unless attendees want to continue to use the chat and Q&A, that's all the outstanding questions that I see.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all. I know this has been a pretty heavy content, so I really appreciate you bearing with me. When we get back, we're gonna move more into animal abuse and the actual House Bill 33 and how we are going to implement that. So why don't I believe our break is 15 minutes, is that right?
Yes.
So back at a little 10:50, does that sound right?
Sounds good. The WebEx platform will remain open. So those of you that are on the call, you don't need to X out of your screen. Just leave your WebEx platform open. We're just going to mute and turn off our cameras, and then we will be back to begin the second half of the presentation at 10:50. So
Okay.
we'll see you soon.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much.
Ready when you are.
So hopefully everyone had a chance to stretch, and refresh. And before I move forward, I just wanted to check back in one more time. Any questions so far before we move forward?
I have some welcome back messages, but I'm not seeing any additional questions at this point in time.
Okay, I'll take welcome back messages. That's nice. All right. So we're going to move into what is animal abuse. So we're moving into that fourth sort of interlocking circle of Venn diagrams, if you will, with the link. And animal abuse is really not specifically in our scope of practice. If we think about elder abuse, child abuse, domestic violence, these are direct human issues. And even given that, unless we are trained to investigate and substantiate child abuse, it is not our responsibility to do that. As mandated reporters, it is our responsibility to report to the best of our abilities and in good faith the information that we have, but we are not responsible for deciding whether a case should be opened, investigating, substantiating, and that's child abuse, which is absolutely a practice area in social work. So that's important to keep in mind, because I know with the passage of this bill, there's been concern about that. Like, I'm a social worker. I'm not trained in animal abuse. How am I supposed to determine if animal abuse is happening? And um, the I guess the short answer is you don't. You report your knowledge, your suspicion, based in good faith as a layperson, not an expert in animal abuse. Again, we're not even held to that with child abuse or elder abuse. So as we move forward, we're looking at this just to help familiarize you with animal abuse and give you a bit more of a foundation and even a comfort level, just understanding it, so that you feel more comfortable moving forward with reporting mandate and responsibility. But this by no means is you need to learn how to assess animal abuse and neglect. That's what cruelty investigators do. That's their role. So starting with two kind of broader prevailing definitions of animal abuse. On the top, we have Essione in the early 90s, and he defined this animal abuse as socially unacceptable, which is important caveat here, behavior human behavior, we could say, that intentionally causes unnecessary pain and suffering or distress to and or death of an animal. So under this definition here, which is not a legal definition per se, but more in the research and practice literature here, but neglect, you can see, wouldn't fall, accidental neglect, or neglect that's correlating with the person's inability to care for themselves, and so they're not able to care for their pet as well, kind of thing, would not even fall here. This is about deliberate, which is certainly one aspect. Agnew, on the other hand, in the late 90s, came back with a much broader, any act, even socially acceptable actions that harm animals, like hunting, for example. So this definition did not exclude socially acceptable action. So there was a lot of pushback and concern about this one, but that contributes to the pain or death of an animal or otherwise threatens the welfare. So this is inclusive of neglect. It's inclusive of socially acceptable actions, much broader. And then there's the in between. We could pull more studies, and I could put more quotes in here. There's some common, I guess the biggest disagreement is socially acceptable versus unacceptable, intention versus not intention. But in terms of how it's affecting the animal, it's pain, death, suffering, otherwise threatens the welfare of the animal. These are some of the common denominators, literature on animal abuse. Looking more specifically, it can be categorized, if we use it as an umbrella, neglect. And this is very much in line with how we define human neglect. So it's more of not meeting basic needs around food, water, shelter, basic care, as opposed to overt, actions of harm. Hoarding is probably one of the most under-addressed kinds of animal abuse. This is kind of a often extreme neglect situation, sometimes also outright abuse as well, but not always. And there's a range of underpinnings of hoarding. We could put this on a continuum, and at one end we have folks that are the purest of intended in terms of taking in animals who are homeless or injured or otherwise in need, but then not having the capacity to care for them, and not being able or willing to relinquish them to better circumstances, sometimes out of fear for what will happen to the animal. And if the animals aren't spayed or neutered, or the person continues to acquire, it can absolutely become extremely awful for the animal and person hoarding situation, where the conditions aren't, healthy or sanitary for the person, feces, urine, sometimes, dead animals, injured animals, and then of course for the animals themselves, terrible conditions. In situations where the person does have a strong attachment to the animals, this in particular is actually where collaboration is really important, and a number of communities actually have coalitions or work groups with multiple sectors: public health, the cruelty investigator entity, whoever that is, adult protective services, if it's older adults, like mental health entity, like a rescue crisis. And why a crisis mental health center? In some instances, it kind of goes back to what I started with talking about today, where the person, is attached to the animals to the point where removing the animals can precipitate a mental health crisis. So, having that mental health support be a part of, intervention around reporting, along with the health department and the cruelty and investigator. And in some instances, a couple animals may be able to be placed back with supports, but unfortunately, sometimes the behavior can be recurrent if the person isn't using ongoing mental health services, or is doing so, but is still struggling with the hoarding behavior. Physical abuse is intentional physical acts for the purpose of harming the animal. The motivation for that, can vary from, morbid curiosity. The person that I described with the kitten in the jar wasn't angry at the kitten. He was bored and curious and like, what would this look like, kind of a thing. It could be related to the interpersonal violence, the kinds of situations we've already discussed: punishment, coercion, terrorizing, kinds of things. It could be an act of anger or impulse control toward the animal. Or if it may be an absolute, lack of knowledge or intent. There are situations, where that happens. So, this can vary. And then sexual animal abuse, unfortunately, is another prevalent issue. And sometimes it's more, violent sex acts, other times other kinds of sex acts, and any of these are considered abuse, generally speaking, across definitions. Kind of doubling back, when there's a desire, a purposeful, deliberate harm, pain, or suffering inflicted, this is actually a diagnostic criteria for two mental disorders, is what they're called in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's put out by the American Psychiatric Association. That's our diagnostic handbook that we use here in this country. So the one is conduct disorder. And this is diagnosed in children and adolescents. And this entails, there's verbal defiance, which is a different diagnosis. If it's just that's called oppositional defiant disorder. So it includes that. However, it also, if we think of conduct meaning behavior, this disorder also includes behaviors that involve harm and violation of the rights of others. And that can be, direct physical harm, fire setting, property damage, law breaking, harm to animals. So this is a disorder that again is diagnosed in childhood and adolescence. And then there is a diagnosis that is typically, as with most personality disorders, they should almost always be diagnosed in adulthood, because of so many developmental changes with kids. Hard to pick out traits versus all the other things that might be happening. Antisocial personality likewise involves that disregard for the rights of others, harm, property damage, law breaking, harm to animals. So how are these two related? I'm asked, and what I can say is, with antisocial personality disorder, this is about long-standing personality traits. So folks diagnosed with this must have a history of conduct disorder behavior. Maybe they weren't diagnosed, it just, they didn't get treatment or whatnot, but if you explore their history, they have the behaviors. So to have antisocial personality disorder, you have to have the adolescent, the early onset of some of these traits and behaviors. So everybody that has antisocial personality disorder is going to have stuff that look like conduct disorder. The flip is not true, however. So what does that mean? Everybody with conduct disorder does not automatically become diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. In fact, I would say even most people with conduct disorder don't go ahead and end up meeting the criteria for antisocial personality. So there's different lines of research sorting that out, but I think the encouraging factor is there's a window for intervention there. This is a disorder that for whatever reason, most people don't have a matching adult disorder that encompasses these traits, which, if we can figure out what that is and what that's about, leverage that and build that in to interventions. We've done well with borderline personality disorder, the development of dialectical behavior therapy by Dr. Marsha Linehan. Before DBT came out, people said, there's no treatment for people living with borderline personality disorder. They don't get any better. Just this sort of stigma, they can't be helped kind of thing. But we now know we have effective practices through DBT and the skills modules that can really be of great help to people. So I guess my hope is that we kind of get in here in this space with conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder and see what kind of interventions might be developed. And so this is a whole sort of subset, if you will, related to mental disorder and animal abuse. Animal abuse in childhood is a strong predictor of interpersonal violence later in life. Looking across studies and reviews, it looked around like a third of kids who abused animals were likely to engage in some kind of interpersonal violence. A few other characteristics: most reported abusers were male and up to 5 times more likely to commit other kinds of violent crimes. So, sort of a bird's eye view. So how about considering animal abuse and the law? So we are in the United States, and a lot of legislation around issues like animal abuse is at the state level, and that is very much the case with animal abuse laws. So we have all 50 states that have some sort of protection against animals, or protection for animals against abuse. Within those states, there's quite a bit of variance. And again, the National Link Coalition is a fantastic resource if you have need for any reason, for state by state information. That is my go-to. And then of course in Ohio, if you're wanting to look at county or municipal level information, I would say Ohio Animal Advocates would also be a resource. Of the 50 states, we now have 47 that, including Ohio, that have felony level statutes for certain forms of animal abuse. So again, this is just another indicator of that needle sort of sliding in our collective view of companion animals and their role, in people's lives as more than property. Because the felony level statute is not based on the animal's monetary value. So, for example, I have a little black cat. Her name is Dominique. She's about 10 feet to my left, sleeping, and I don't know what her quote unquote retail value would be. That is pretty offensive to me, even as I'm saying it out loud. She's so much more to me than that. But I'm, it would be a very small sort of property offense if it was just based on her life ending, and that would be depriving me of my property. So it's very much considered from the standpoint of pain and suffering, and egregiousness often bumps up to felony. If not egregious, some states will look at animal abuse as a misdemeanor offense for the first time. And mandated reporting laws vary by state. So not all states require veterinarians to report. House Bill 33 in Ohio, which just passed, in terms of licensed folks that are required, it's us, social workers, counselors, marriage and family therapists, and veterinarians. So up until now, veterinarians in Ohio did not have to report. And I have not looked recently, so I'm not sure if this is still the case, but at least up until I'd say year or so ago, Kentucky actually prohibited vets from reporting, at least at one point. Again, that may have been updated on the books. So veterinarians are kind of in the precarious spot of being both a healthcare provider to the animal and beholden to the person who owns the animal, with the animal being the person's property, and that is a different kind of tension than the tension we have, but unenviable one, definitely. So, and again, the link has breaking news, across state on where laws are in, if they're in committee, are they just being introduced, where they're at. So our law, House Bill 33, is unique for a couple things. First and foremost, this is another example of bipartisan legislation. So this bill was widely supported, both Democrat and Republican, passed almost unanimously, like unheard of. Like, it's just at least encouraging, again, that it's still possible to work across dramatic political difference and find at least some common ground. It might have been unanimous in the Senate, and I think there were maybe 3 votes opposed in the House. I mean, just incredible support across both the House and the Senate, and the sponsors. So not in terms of political motivation, difficult in getting it passed. Some of the issues, some of the reasons this or something like it wasn't passed earlier is animal cruelty legislation in Ohio and other states as well typically ends up in agriculture committee, which is lobbied by agribusiness. And typically there is concern of a slippery slope that any protections that are put forth for pets or companion animals that live in residential dwellings as companions, pretty much any animal but wild animals, definitely dogs and cats. So this group of animals, if we get protections for them, then we start the slippery slope. And what about animals that are who are farmed? And what if we have to start, looking at protections for them and neglect and abuse? And so a lot of animal legislation over the years has not made it out of agriculture committee historically. And prior to this being passed, getting animal cruelty, egregious cruelty passed as a felony was another one that took multiple attempts and ended up dying in committee. Different variations of it for years until eventually there was a critical mass of support and it got passed. And so it was with this legislation. So House Bill 33, in addition to having strong bipartisan support, it was endorsed by a wide cross-section of organizations. NASW Ohio, I'm gonna botch it. It's the State of Ohio Adult Protective Services Organization and the Ohio Child Public Service Agency. So this is like the statewide organization for all the county, child protective service organizations. Both of them endorsed it. Numerous domestic violence coalitions endorsed it, provided feedback. The Ohio Veterinary Medical Association had concerns initially, but they, gave feedback and input that was used to refine the bill, and they too endorsed it. So, this really was a bill put forward through a wide cross section of collaboration of folks who, were really wanting to see, the collective safety net strengthened for people, vulnerable people and animals, and cross-reporting as a tool that could do that. So what else? So this bill, it amends several sections of the Ohio Revised Code, basically reworks a bit specifics of animal abuse and animal abuse requirements. So that piece, the whole bill is, I have the link to the full text up here for you if you want, but these specific changes aren't really things that we need to be too terribly concerned about, because again, we're not the ones that are taking these cases to court that have to, know exactly what the requirements are, and we're not investigating or substantiating. And again, a big purpose of this was to establish cross-reporting, which is known as a emerging best practice. It's definitely, got support as a tool to increase collaborations across, anti-violence entities. So how did it do that? So it again, basically the idea of cross-reporting, I'm gonna see if I can jump ahead, is putting infrastructure in place so that there is ongoing back and forth communication between, animal protection entities, human protection entities, and hopefully, ongoing collaborations and relationships. So At this end here, we have social service professional. Actually, I meant to bold social worker here, because social service professional actually, these are folks that work for child protective services or other county entities that do protective service investigation but aren't licensed social workers, but they are included. So them, us, counselors, marriage and family therapists, we need to report to whoever the cruelty investigator person is when we have reasonable cause that it's occurred or is occurring, the abuse. So that's to here. Up until this bill, cruelty investigators were required to, or were mandated reporters of kids. However, this bill adds dog wardens and other animal control officers. So dog wardens and animal control officers, I think, most folks confuse them with cruelty investigators, but cruelty investigators are exactly what it sounds like. They investigate, they are appointed typically at the county level in Ohio to investigate animal abuse. So they are essentially advocates for the animal. Dog wardens and animal control officers, that control word kind of tips you off. They are kind of folks that historically are there to protect the public from dogs at large, loose dogs, or situations like that. Now that role has evolved, and they will come out when animals are hit by cars a lot. They do much more animal welfare and protection work in addition to public protection, but historically animal control and dog wardens have been protecting people around animal issues, and then the cruelty investigators are kind of protecting animals from the people. But this puts the officer or the dog wardens and the animal control folks as mandated reporters of child abuse, along with the cruelty investigators. So really bringing them all together. So the training I'm going to be doing with them is going to be talking at this end. Same thing. They don't have to substantiate the child abuse. They don't have to investigate it, but if they have reasonable cause, they report. If they're investigating animal abuse and there is a child or an older adult who is over 60 and has vulnerability due to disability or other functional issues, or the if the animal professional has concerns that the abuse toward the animals may be impacting the child or older adult, they're likewise responsible for reporting to Child Protective Services or Adult Protective Services. So House Bill 33, and our part is this: we don't have to know all the things that they need to be doing, and they're just going to be reporting to APS or Child Services. And again, ideally, then we're working clearly if folks are in the same home. So, when specifically, as social workers and the other licensed folks and the social service professionals, and actually the veterinarians too, when are we mandated to report under this legislation? So first and foremost, the legislation specifies that if we're suspecting abuse, that it has to involve a companion animal. And this is defined as any animal kept inside a residential dwelling, so like a pet, other than a wild animal. If you're in doubt, you can always call. I mean, it's sort of the same way I talk about child abuse reporting. If you're not sure, call, and they the line, they know what abuse and neglect are, and who falls under that. And same thing with the animal and the cruelty investigators. So any animal kept inside a residential dwelling, and any dog or cat, indoor or outdoor. You don't see another common animal here, and there was some real disappointment about the fact that horses aren't in here, and that I'm sure going to be revisited, but that was one of the concessions I believe around working with the agri business kind of lobbies, with horses being much closer to livestock and farmed animals. So, but again, if you're not sure, you can call and you will get the information you need. So what actual offenses? Again, you don't have to substantiate what is what necessarily, but just a general awareness. So animal cruelty, abandoning an animal, poisoning an animal, which certainly would fall under cruelty. And cruelty is sort of a broad umbrella of abuse and neglect. Dog fighting, and sexual conduct with animals. So these are the specific types of actions that are covered. And I just want to reiterate, we are not required, veterinarians are not even required or expected to investigate or substantiate abuse. They certainly can be helpful, around injuries and documentation and in ways that we are not, because they are, animal health care experts. But just be clear that you are not required or expected to investigate or substantiate animal abuse. That is not our scope of practice, and nobody's expecting us to suddenly generate that. This was passed under the spirit of cross-reporting as an anti-violence tool to connect the dots and sort of build out a safety net of collaboration. What we are obligated to do is to immediately, or as soon as possible, make a report in good faith. So to the best of our ability, and this is a direct quote, when we have knowledge or reasonable cause to suspect that the abuse has occurred or is occurring. And this is actually from Ohio Animal Advocates. This is, and I have this in the resources that are going to be emailed out to you, but this is from their tip sheet. So it's like the recognize, just show. We have 2 recognizes in a report, the 3 R's they call it. So the first they suggest is recognize physical signs. So, pretty straightforward. First is if you actually see somebody harm the animal. And there is some judgment here. Somebody jerks on the leash hard, is that harmful? It's not pleasant. It's not good for the animal. But that's very different than seeing somebody kick an animal or hit them or throw them against a wall, or any number of acts that you might observe or be told. So overt, deliberate harm. And then some of these are indicators visually. Extremely thin animals. And, again, there's, I don't know, for those of you who have pets and they have those charts at the vet where they show, underweight, extremely emaciated, a little bit overweight, and then obese for your pets. This is not looking for that kind of nuance. This is, you're looking at the animal and thinking like, oh my goodness, like this animal is underweight, and you're concerned. Animals that are cowering or showing, extreme fear, not of you, because not all animals are socialized or to others outside their immediate people, or are maybe just not welcoming. by temperament, but if they're cowering and having, fear, urinating when their person looks at them, shaking, crying, that would be an indicator. Open wounds or, multiple healed wounds that aren't explained could be a possibility. Limping, not being able to walk or stand, collar embedded in the animal's neck. Unfortunately, that's not at all uncommon. It's never adjusted for the animal. When the animal's a baby and the animal keeps growing, the collar grows in. Hair, scaly skin, bumps or rashes. And again, I'm not talking about, somebody, my dog has a little scaly, skin thing going on her leg. This is more of the, you're looking at the animal going, oh my goodness. Severe matted fur, filthy coat, discharge from eyes, extreme confusion or drowsiness, parasite infections that are significant, severe. Okay. The next pictures I'm going to be showing you, I wanted to give you a heads up. So if you wanted to look away for this part, what I can say is all of these animals had happy endings. And that is not the case with all animals that experience these kinds of things, but this was, I guess, my deliberate choice. I wanted to give you some visuals here, but I also, want to bring in, such disturbance that it, affects you. I've been to trainings, on this topic because this is an area. One in particular, I still will have sort of thoughts or images, like intrusive thoughts about it was an all-day training, and it was a workshop, and I had time and it was available and it was included in the cost. So I went, and it was about forensic veterinary services, and some of my other, social work colleagues who were there also went. One walked out crying. A couple other people left. A few of us, me included, stayed. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't, because we saw actual, video footage of animals being, horrifically injured and then sort of breaking down like which parts of their bodies were damaged, and it just was not it wasn't helpful. It didn't help my ability to do this, kind of work in a way that's helpful or effective for anyone. So in that spirit, I do have some disturbing images, but all of these animals are now in adored and loving homes. So, okay. First is underweight. So you can see just the difference from a month. This is actually, I got this off the Toledo Humane Society's Facebook page, so public pictures. So this dog was a cruelty case. I don't know the details, but you can see, the spine, bumps. You can see ribs, shoulder blade, hip bones. So, this is just my layperson sort of looking and seeing, the animal's skeleton through the animal's skin and being able to make a determination. This is a very malnourished animal, or at least looks that way. Now, what else could be happening? In this case, that's exactly what was happening. This dog was starved to death and barely able to stand. And see weight gain. Coat looks good, so great improvement. However, there could be a situation, maybe this dog has a terminal illness, was diagnosed with cancer, and they're doing hospice care. I just there could be extenuating circumstances, so it's always reasonable to inquire if in your judgment you're feeling able to do that. And if that was the case and this had been investigated, then it would have been open, and it would have not even been a case that was open. They would have made a home visit and gotten the information probably expressed sorrow for, what they were going through with the dog and moved on. But this is an example of malnutrition. This was an injury and a hoarding case. And actually, these are both kind of after pictures, but he had a leg injury and some other internal issues. So not sure what happened in the hoarding situation to cause the trauma to the leg, but again, limping, I think wasn't even able to use the leg. So obvious indicators, not things that would take, expertise outside of our scope of practice. And here's an example of a kitten. And again, you can see beautiful and healthy now. But this would be, needs veterinary care, and for whatever reason, not getting it. Horrible. It looks like I don't know if it's eye infection, because again, I'm not an animal care professional, but you can see discharge and crust and the eyes are barely open, and so animal in need of veterinary care. This is an injury. Not sure exactly what the cause was. Looks like there may be some skin infection. Again, I don't know, but you can clearly, just visually looking at the cat, you can see that this cat is not okay, that this cat is in need of medical attention. We don't know what the diagnosis is. We just know as lay people looking at this cat, this cat does not look like a cat should. And again, with care and food, here is Kitty doing quite well. So we looked at recognizing physical signs and, some examples of that. The animal having an injury, the animal being malnourished, the animal having some kind of condition, we don't know, but that clearly, they look like they need some kind of veterinary help and haven't received it for whatever reason. And so those would be physical signs. Then we have what we would consider environmental signs that we can be aware of. And, one is the animal living in filthy conditions. And I don't mean filthy conditions like the house hasn't been vacuumed for 2 weeks. You guys, have you come and see my house. You'll see the little furry tumbleweeds that are abounding right now. That's not what I mean. We're talking like feces, garbage, broken glass, dangerous for people and animals. Again, that link. These are not, these would be like health risks for the people as well as the animals. So if we're worried about the animal being in the filthy conditions and it's inside the house, then, we need to be addressing the people, as well, in terms of helping to support them in, living in a less dangerous situation. Outdoors, if they are outside for long periods, and that's a sort of a quality judgment, but without food, water, and or shelter. So these are pretty minimal. They need to have food, they need to have water, they need to have shelter. And maybe the food's not out there, but somebody is feeding them, they're not emaciated, kind of thing. If it's hot, if it's cold, like freezing cold, or extremely hot, either which can kill an animal if it's severe enough, those would be situations where if they're outside for any extended period, that would be a environmental risk for them. And that would be the next one, the inclement weather. If they are kept in a crate continually, you've never seen them outside the crate is full of feces, urine, hair, Maybe even too small. They can't sit, stand, or turn around. Those would be environmental red flags. Is the home overcrowded with animals in cages or kennels? And again, overcrowded is a judgment call. I've known people that have had animals, double digits, and they are meticulously cared for. And other folks might have 4 animals, but if they're not able to care for them, that can be an issue. So, we have to keep in mind, but overcrowded can sometimes look like there's, the hoarding situation where there's not room to walk or, use the dwelling, use the house the way, you sit down on the furniture and eat at the table and, the things that we might typically do in a house because the crates are everywhere. And a lot of times that can be associated with hygiene or hygiene sort of a mild, but like the health risks around like, feces and urine and things that create physical health risk issues for people too. This is a picture of a hoarding situation. You can see there's carriers stacked. I don't know that you can see well. There's excrement, there's urine, and it's pretty much wall-to-wall carriers, and these had not been cleaned in quite a while. These are fly strips. So they had a lot of, fly infestation because of the feces. We're trying to deal with the urine smell through the fan. So health risks for the people as well. And again, this is really where a good macro sort of coordinated response ahead of time can be so helpful because really the animals are a piece, but working with the person is a piece, and then resources to get this house back to, or this dwelling back up to standard for the person to live safely in is a whole other piece. Another example of a hoarding situation, you don't see as many animals, but they were tied up throughout the house. This dog was pregnant or had just had a litter. So again, it's not, we're not here to judge anybody's, housekeeping per se, but if it's to the point where it's detrimental to the person's health, the animal's health, then it's a situation where we'd want to be intervening and ideally in a helping way. So we recognize physical signs, basic physical signs. We recognize basic environmental signs. These are the things that we're essentially looking for. These are the common kinds of animal abuse, I should say, that you're likely to come across. So what do we do? So we can report. Who do we report to? We're gonna, talk through all of this more. This is the tip sheet, but Ohio Animal Advocates has a link to where you can look up by county who you should report to, because it varies. In Toledo, our cruelty investigators actually are at the Toledo Humane Society, which is a private nonprofit. They're a 501c3, so they don't get any public funds, and so they actually, as a nonprofit, do a big community service for us in doing the cruelty investigating. Essentially, they're doing a government function with no public funding to do it. Other counties appoint that cruelty investigation role differently, so it might be an animal control officer. It could even be somebody police related. especially in smaller municipalities where they may not have, as much of a budget to have somebody appointed separately. And again, this is not something you need to commit to memory. We have Ohio Animal Advocates, and if you're out of Ohio, the link is always where I would start. So what do we include when we report? So a description of the animal, the species, color, size, if we know the animal's name, if there's more than one, information for however many, the address or telephone number of the owner or the person responsible, if you know it, or as much information as you can provide about the location of the animal. Address helps, but if it's, on the dog is chained in the front yard of the corner of, Bancroft and Secor, that would possibly work, depending, that's close enough. It's typically not as stringent in terms of looking into a case as some of the human investigation entities. Most animal protection investigators will go out with sometimes partial information if they can reasonably, find a location. The nature and extent of the suspected abuse. What did you see or hear? What are you concerned about? In as much detail as possible. And we're social workers, so we already know how to document. So just using those skills, to be specific and concrete, and we can use quotes, we can describe behaviors, but we already have strong documentation skills, so just laying that out if we're doing a write-up. Any other information that you think would be helpful to establishing the abuse, or if the violator's identity is not known, anything to help with that. And you can do it verbally or written. So you can call it in. Some cruelty investigation entities even have like a website that you can do an online report that would be considered a written report, or they have emails that should be considered a written report. There's probably other kinds of written, report options depending on the entity. So, either or. When you report, once you've reported, the cruelty investigator, dog warden, or deputy warden may exclude information from your report that is confidential, outside of the information needed to substantiate the abuse, at their discretion. And if there's some kind of ongoing criminal investigation involved with the people that you've called in about, they may hold off for that reason also. So at their end, when they have the information, they have some discretion in terms of what they might include, if it's thought to reasonably possibly jeopardize the ongoing investigation that's already happening. So we make the report. Once we do this, we do it in good faith, and in good faith basically means, with the best of intentions, we truly are concerned. We're, operating, from a place of honesty, that kind of thing. Given that we have civil and criminal immunity through House Bill 33. So we are protected, which is a tremendous support in terms of enabling us to be able to respond more effectively to the link between violence toward animals and violence toward people. Because up until this bill, I mentioned that I would, get contacted on a regular basis by social workers just witnessing or hearing horrific things, and then being in the unconscionable situation of having to decide if they should risk their license or not, to make a report, because there were no guarantees or specific guidance. If we look at the code of ethics, there's certainly directions that it takes us. There's no legal protection for folks, so this eliminates that issue and protects us. We are not allowed to knowingly make a false report. That is a 4th-degree misdemeanor. But I think that's falsifying a report. That's a problem. That's an ethical issue. That's many kinds of not good. So that would be deliberate ethical misconduct, and yeah. So what about enforcing if people do not report, and then for whatever reason it comes to light that they didn't? So the consequences for failure to report vary by role. And basically, it's social service professionals have one sort of consequence, and then all the licensed folks. I listed the human service people here, but actually veterinarians, I have to, I'm like 99% sure I skimmed it. I didn't put it on the slide, but I think we're all pretty much subject to the same thing here. So social service professionals, again, these are the folks that aren't licensed and are in child protection agency roles or county protective service roles. Their employer must issue a confidential written warning that they have failed to execute this responsibility, and they must provide an explanation of the reporting requirements under House Bill 33, what we just went over. They may, at their discretion, they being the employer, may add additional penalties, but they don't have to. And it is up to them. It's them being the employer. So that is the extent of consequence for social service professionals. For those of us who hold license, so us, the social workers, counselors, marriage and family therapists, and the veterinary folks, we fall under the jurisdiction of our professional standards committees. Oops. So this is the entity that is responsible for enforcing House Bill 33. So the first violation, if we knowingly fail to report, and it is discovered, however it is discovered, get a confidential written warning and an explanation of the requirement to ensure that we are in fact, aware that we have this duty. The second violation, failure to report, is a $100 fine. Subsequent are $500 fines. If we make a false report, so this is purposely falsifying a report of animal cruelty, it is a $100 fine the first time and $500 fines subsequent time. The licensure board does have the discretion to suspend or revoke our license for the second or subsequent violations of either failing to report or making a false report. So they can, it's up to them. And all of these funds go into state treasury, the occupational licensing and regulatory fund, which my understanding is that then helps support the licensing boards. So fines are only for folks with a license, and only after the first violation and education of the responsibility. And that concludes the legal pieces of House Bill 33. So having gone through that, my hope is you have an understanding of what your reporting responsibilities are, where you can find who you need to report to, and what you need to report, and also the consequences of failure to report or false reporting. Taking this back to our code of ethics, and I want to make sure I wrap up with some more time for questions. But again, our code of ethics, I just see as our North Star that guides us. We kind of come back to looking at animal abuse. It is an egregious crime in and of itself. It's also not just a crime against animals. And again, to reiterate, we've looked at the different dimensions of the link, the connections between animal abuse and domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse, just to name a few. Also, the mental disorders that are associated with it, conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder. If we had more time, we could go into some more of the research in that area. The vast majority of folks who are convicted serial killers have history of animal abuse. Mass shooting offenders disproportionately have a history of animal abuse, and we could go on. So there is this risk and this correlation. The FBI began tracking animal abuse alongside other crimes against essentially what are considered crimes against the state, or crimes against society: arson, burglary, assault, homicide. And looking at animal abuse as both what we call like an indicator, sort of a red flag of progression to other more dangerous to human kinds of offenses, and as a risk in and of itself, or I'm sorry, and as an egregious offense in and of itself. And this was just a quote when the FBI put out their press release. This was the leader in the National Sheriff's Association really calling for shedding the mindset that animal cruelty is a crime only against animals, and really reiterating that these are offenses against society. And I'm going to jump over this for 1 minute to bring it back to ethics, and then we'll come back to questions. So kind of bringing that thought forward, we're a profession that has a dual focus on individual well-being and our collective well-being as a society. And that's explicated or explained a bit more under our service value, that we have a primary goal to help both people in need and to address social problems, and under dignity and worth of the person, that we have a dual responsibility to our clients and to our broader society. And we are always working, of course, to resolve conflicts in a way that is full and balances both interest. And then a couple of sections help, I think, offer a bit more things to consider here, that our responsibility to the larger society may on limited occasions supersede loyalty owed to our clients. Now, that does not mean we ditch our clients by the road or anything to that effect. That may mean we have an isolated incident, which is now legislated. I mean, now it's we don't even have the ethical wiggle room. We're mandated reporters by law in Ohio. But just looking at this from an ethical lens, there is space here for the argument to be made even before the law was passed. And then in 1.02, we're called to limit rights to self-determination when there's risk to self for other. And we've looked at how animal abuse can be harmful to people as well as the animals themselves. In addition to those ethical issues, this is another biggie, and this goes back to our duty to our clients. Because we are mandated, this needs to be included in our informed consent when we are talking with folks about the limits of confidentiality, which is typically at intake or initial appointment, or ideally before any sort of ongoing active service decision is made by the client. We want to spell out our limits. We're confidential to the extent we can be by law, which up until now included the harm to self or other people and animals. And we could go into more detail about that, but essentially we need, just like our other limitations of confidentiality, we need to make sure we are being proactive and upfront about that. Our clients have the right, excuse me, my voice is going a little. Our clients have the right to know that information upfront. That should not be a surprise. Ever, to the extent, unless it's we're crisis workers and we're meeting the person for the first time and walk into an animal abuse. There's always extenuating circumstances, but when we're able to do informed consent, this needs to be a part of the limitation, and it could, depending on how your agency does that, it could be more detailed, less, but we want to make sure we are providing that information. And I mentioned the animal abuse by county. I might just have to let you look at this yourselves, but I'm trying. Okay, I think it's loading. This is encouraging. Let me move it over to my shared screen. Yay. Are you seeing the Ohio Animal Advocates as of April 2020? I'm going to go with no news. So this is the list by county. And then they also have that search feature that you could search in if for whatever reason you find that something is not as up to date as it needs to be. I showed you the community pet care resource links, so you have that. This is a list of domestic violence shelters in Ohio that have provisions for pets. This is a PDF, and again, you can search in the online resource. These are some emergency vet resources. If you're working with somebody whose pet has been abused by somebody and is injured, there's a number of small grants that you can try for, and Red Rover again is national, but they have state by state resources, and definitely have some real helpful resources. They have an outreach manager that occasionally, when I would get unusual situations that people would ask me, I would contact them and be like, hey, this is what's happening, can you help us? So good to know that you're not on your own ever. As social workers, getting out there, finding those resources, connecting to them, that's how we how we do, and this is no exception. And this is a tip sheet that has some resources. And finally, I'm gonna stop here, give some time for discussion and question and answer, but I just wanted to make sure I thanked all of you for your attention. I know this wasn't, a feel-good topic, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and here is my email if you have further questions after today. So thank you so much. Sam, are you there? I wanted to open it up for questions.
No?
Oh, I can hear you now. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, thank you. Sorry, I was talking and I was telling you that I can see thank you. I will hear the CE evaluation here in just a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to thank you for your time, your resources, your expertise is absolutely incredible. The wealth of knowledge that you have on this topic. I am not a social worker, but I very much appreciated the content and learned so much in that time frame. So we thank you again for taking the time to present. It has been such a pleasure working with you and your colleagues in the social work program as we put this event together during Social Work Month. I would also, I'm sharing the evaluation link in just a moment, but as the representative for the Alumni Association, I want to invite all of you on the call today to share your thoughts. If you're not applying for CE credits, that's okay. Please take a moment to look at the evaluation because there is a section that will ask for your opinions, your topics, if there's your content that you would like us to cover. We can partner again with our social work program on various topics and other programs within the college. So we are here to be a resource. I am going to share my screen that has the evaluation information, but as I do that, I'm going to ask Janet if you would mind answering a couple of questions that came in. Let me scroll to the top here. So one of our attendees is asking, when animal cruelty comes out to attend to a dog of reports of abuse, would it be normal for a social worker to analyze the family for abuse?
If the cruelty investigation is coming out, let's just say somebody from the general public called in an animal abuse complaint, then typically when the cruelty investigator goes out, they would just be assessing the animal cruelty. If let's say you've made a report of animal cruelty in a situation with a client and a family, I would definitely say you would want to be assessing that family dynamic, because the animal cruelty is definitely a risk factor for, we looked at those different dimensions of the link. So, figuring out, is this maybe a mental health issue? Is this, where there's interpersonal abuse, happening in the family of some sort? But definitely that's something that we want to do some assessing around to see how we can best support that family system. Good question. I hope I answered it.
I am sharing my screen. I hope you can see it okay, but it does have information on how to complete the CE evaluation. And as I mentioned, even if you are not applying for continuing education credits, please take a moment to click that link because there are some questions that will help us moving forward as an alumni association. The social work program, we want to help provide content that is important to you. So there are a couple questions in there about what is of interest to you, what you would like to see from us. This link will also be emailed to you. So whatever email you use to access today's program, that's what I have on file, and that's where I will send you a copy of the CE evaluation link and your certificate for completing today's CE program. As Janet mentioned, we do have some resources to share with you as well, some PDFs, some information that was shared during today's program. So I will attach those to the follow-up email as well. I do have another question that came in if you wouldn't mind answering.
Not at all. Yeah, please.
This question. Community members are able to report child abuse and or neglect anonymously. I can't even say the word. Does the same protection apply to reporters under HB 33?
That is a good question. I mean, I know general animal abuse or animal cruelty reports can be anonymous. I did not see anything in the analysis, but I can ask the attorneys that worked on the bill and with the representatives just to double check that. Anonymous. And if I email, because I was already going to email about the Domestic Violence Coalition in Lucas County to just check on the animal care, and my sense is it would be yes, you would be able to, but again, I don't want to misinform, so I would rather talk to one of the attorneys who worked on the bill and with the representatives to make sure that we're getting the absolute accurate information. But in general, I mean, and you only are mandated when you're acting in a professional capacity. So when you're functioning as a social worker in your work role. If you're on a walk with your kids and you see something in your neighborhood, then that's your discretion as a community member. So that's for sure. Like, you of course can report anonymously. And in your professional role, I'm thinking yes, but I will check. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. I must have copied and pasted the link wrong. Some of you are saying it's not working. That's my apologies. But do not worry. Again, you will get an email copy of this link as well. So for whatever reason it's not translating from the chat function, I will get you an email copy, and then I'm also going to drop my contact information in the chat box as well. And like I said, it will be in the email to you. So if you have any questions, if your computer does not agree with Microsoft products, which is where the evaluation is housed on a Microsoft form, it's really easy for me to put it in a different platform. So I can do that for you. We want to make sure that you get your credit for today's program.
And I can vouch for Samantha, because she those of you who've worked with me and other things know my tech ability is limited, and she's been wonderful to work with and has gotten me through. So I am certain she will, do whatever is needed to get you your continuing education credits. Just stay in touch with her. She's great.
Thank you. So it looks like those are the questions that I can see. If something got lost, and I missed it, I apologize. Oh, actually, I did miss one. Well, we have another minute here. Does the reporter receive any feedback or follow-up from the report?
It varies because the investigating entity, there's so much, it differs so much by county. So it's hard for me to say, but what I can say, you can always follow up. We're kind of good at being squeaky wheels as social workers. So I mean, if you're feeling like you need more information for your own self, or because of your client's needs or whatever, I'd encourage you to just follow back up and and see where it's at. But in general, they, I would say are likely to contact you for information, just, to clarify things and get a better idea of how to proceed with it, would be my sense, but.
Thank you. So because we're here in the 12:15 mark, and I think I've got all of the questions, I do want to thank you again, Janet, for hosting this event with us today. Again, I learned a lot, so I know that our fellow social workers learned a lot as well. And I do want to let all of you know that are still on the call, just as a friendly reminder, in honor of Social Work Month, which is happening now, we are continuing to raise funds for the Connie Shondell Scholarship Social Work students. So I invite you to join the Rocket community and show your support. The link to make an early gift or to share this campaign with your friends and co-workers, colleagues, whoever you think would be interested, please visit the chat box. We'd love your support to help our fellow students. But with that, I'm going to close the presentation for today. If you have any questions, please reach out to myself or Janet. She is the expert, but I can certainly help get you in contact with her if there's questions. I will leave the WebEx platform open for a few more minutes as you continue to complete the evaluation. I don't want to close you out of anything, but that is all for today's event. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Samantha, for hosting us and giving us this opportunity to meet today. Really appreciate it.
Of course. We'll see ya. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.